Hey, what's up guys? It's Pedro here from noobcoder.com, and in this tutorial we are going to be talking more in depth with state and set state. Alright, so to get started, we're just going to have this basic template to start off with. We're going to have an empty state. We're going to have a function which basically invokes our setState function, and we're going to pass this as an onClick handler to this button. Once we click the button, we're going to update the state. All right, so now that that is out of the way, let's go ahead and give our state a couple of properties. I'm going to have a counter. And just for variety, I'm going to have a name. All right, so to get started, I want to talk about shallow merging. So what I'm going to do is come down to our update state, and we're going to invoke the setState function. So we're just going to say this.setState, and let's go ahead and change the name. So we'll change the name to Peter, for example. And what we're going to do is come down here and let us go ahead and print the state out so we can see what's happening. So I'm just going to save and let us bring up the web page. And what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and hit F12. We're going to click me. And this is important. This is actually what we're going to talk about later within this tutorial. But for now, you should notice that I click the button. Name should be set to Peter, right? But it's not. It's currently at Bob. And this is not an error. It's just that this.setState is an asynchronous call. This is not a synchronous event. So what's happening is I call this setState function out, but by the time I reach this line, the state hasn't updated. So what we're seeing is the old state. So what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and click it one more time. And you see that our state is set to Peter. Now, what is shallow merging? Well, you saw that within this setState method, I just passed an object with just a property of name and the value of Peter. So you should think to yourself that, hey, whenever I call setState, this object is going to overwrite the state. But it doesn't. It does a shallow merge. So in other words, it sees that, hey, this guy wants to update the name. So we're going to take the property values of the object we pass into our setState function, and that's going to override the property values of our state object. So that's shallow merging, and that's what React is doing behind the scene. So we still have our counter property, even though we didn't specifically pass it in here. So that's just a shallow merge. All right, so now let us give us another example. And instead of using primitive types, what we can do is let's create an object. So we'll have person, and we'll give him two properties. We'll give him first name, and we'll give him a last name. Okay, I actually want to spell this out to Peter. Okay, so now from here, let us update this person. So I'm going to comment this out for now. We're going to say this.setState, and let's say for the person, I just want to update his first name. So we'll say first name, and instead of Peter, we'll say Billy. Okay, so now let's go ahead and save this. Bring up our app. We're going to click me twice. And the second time, you'll see that our state has shallowly merged. So we still have counter name. But if you take a look at person, person only has a first name. So in other words, our last name is lost. And that's because React only performs a shallow merge. So in other words, since this is one level in, counter and name, it will fully copy that. But it won't go any deeper than one level. So this is basically an object within an object because person is an object, and it won't copy the last name for us. So what we're going to need to do is do it ourselves. So back to the question, let's say I wanted to change the first name. Is it possible just to change the first name? Well, I can say this.setState, we could pass a person object. So right now we have an empty object. What I want to do is copy all the properties within this person object. So we're going to use the spread operator. And before we do that, let's go ahead and do some destructuring. We'll pull out person from the state, and we'll come down here. We'll use the spread operator. And if you don't know what the spread operator does, what it's going to do is copy all the properties from this person state to this empty object that we just created. Now all we need to do is override the first name. So we called it Billy. Just comment that out. Now we'll save it and we'll take a look at it now. So we take a look at it. Our person object has our first name and last name. And you see that we successfully changed it to Billy. Okay, so if you're working with objects, you just have to keep in mind that React isn't going to copy the other properties for you. You're going to have to make your own copy. So that's what we did. And then you're going to have to override the property that you want to change. So now let us give an example with an array. Okay, so we have an object example. So let's say I have an array called people, and we're just going to have Bob, Billy, and Mike. Or is that Mick? I don't know, but it doesn't matter. So we have this people array, and let's say that I want to add to this state, to this people. So let us go ahead and comment this out. And this time we're going to say this.setState. We want to change people and we want to add to it. So your first thought process might be, can't I just say this.state.people.push, right? And then you add whoever you want to add, right? Now you can't do that because you cannot mutate the state directly. Okay, so never do this. So let's get rid of that. So the same exact concept as we did with our object, we're going to create an empty array. And instead of just writing this.state.people, I'm just going to pull that out here. And what we're going to do is just copy all the people within our people state. And we could just add whoever we want to add. So I could say like so. So same exact concept, create a new array. Copy all the people within this array, and then add whatever you want to add. So if I save this, take a look at the web browser, we're going to click, take a look at people, and there you go. You see that this is added to the back and it successfully makes a copy. All right, so moving on. Let's talk about some problems you might run into due to the setState being an async function. So for now, let us go ahead and comment this out. I want to be working with counter. So what I'm going to do is update the counter. And we are just going to pull counter from the state. Now let's go ahead and save this. And let's open up the web browser. Okay, so now I'm just going to say click me. And again, I already addressed this, but you can see that due to the nature of setState being asynchronous, you see that we call the setState and counter should be incremented, but it's not. And that's because the state hasn't been updated yet. So let's say I only want to execute this console.log when the counter state updates. So how can I go about doing that? To fix this problem, I could pass in a callback and put this log within the callback. So now what's going to happen is we're going to update the state. Once this finishes updating, this callback is going to be invoked and we are going to print out the state. So let's go ahead and bring up the browser again. Click it. You see that first the state updates and then the callback is invoked, which prints out the updated state correctly. All right, so now let's move on to what happens if we have multiple set states, one right after another. So let's say that instead of increasing by 1, so calling this one time, we call this a bunch of times. So 3, 4, 5. And now I save this. Let's take a look at the browser. Click me. You see that we don't get the desired output. So what's happening here? Well, when React sees that we have multiple set states, what it's going to do is batch it together. And that's because at the end of the day, you do not want to trigger the render method 5 different times. That's why it batches it all together. But another problem is they're all using the same state. Remember, this is asynchronous. So they're all using this.state.counter, which is initialized to 0. Okay, so how do I fix this? How do I update the state based on the current state and not an old state, for example? How can I guarantee to get the current state? Well, what I can do is let's go ahead and get rid of these. Instead of passing an object as the first argument, what I can do is pass an update handler or an update function. And we're going to get two things. We're going to get state and we're going to get props. Now, this state and this props is guaranteed to be the current version of the state and props. So whenever you're accessing the state using this, right? This is not guaranteed to be the latest version. I think we proved that with the last run that we did. So now what I can do is within this function, I can return an object with the updated state. So I could just say counter is going to be set to state.counter plus 1. And now if I make a copy of this, so let's just copy this 2, 3, 4, 5, and now save this. Let's take a look at what happens. So we're going to click me, and I should probably, let's actually output counter because I think it's easier to show. So I'm going to come down here and we'll say counter, and we'll just output the counter. All right, so now let's save this, take a look at the browser, and we're going to click me, and you see that now it's working as intended. So if you are calling multiple set states and you want to make sure that you're working with the current value that the state is in, use the updater function. Okay, so this is guaranteed to execute the way that you want it to. Alrighty, so this is pretty much all I wanted to cover within this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next one.